Thank you for tuning in to Tom and Adam's Midnite Variety Hour. I'm Tom.
And I'm Adam.
And our guest today is none other than Daniele Bolelli. Daniele Bolelli is a very, very acclaimed author, podcaster. He's a martial arts practitioner. He has found success in many fields, but today he will be our guest. He's carved out time in his schedule to talk to us. We're very lucky to have him. You may know him from his appearances on the Joe Rogan Experience, the Duncan Trussel Family Hour, many other podcasts, including his own, History on Fire, and the Drunken Taoist. Adam, what do you have to say about Mr. Daniele Bolelli?
I am a huge fan of Daniele Bolelli. I feel like he is an extremely interesting person, and he should be more well known than what he is, I feel like. And he's had a huge influence on my life, the way I perceive life, the way I interact with reality, because of the stories he's told and his little gems that he puts in his podcast that really inspire me and give me an insight into the human experience.
Right. Today, we will talk with him about a great number of things, but what I'd like to stress most of all is that after listening to our show today, you go to his website or some other form of internet database and you check out his work, whether it be one of his podcasts, one of his lectures, one of his books, or just some of his martial arts videos. I think it's the least you can do for a man that is doing all of humanity a great service by doing his amount of research and just giving us the content that he's given us, because I've learned a lot just in listening to him. So I think I think talking to him was a great opportunity, and I think everyone should also share in that opportunity by checking out what he has to say. But without further ado, we are pleased to give you the Midnite Variety Hour.
You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind.
With the emergence of global internet, a human population of several billions, an electronic noosphere, that we are now within the shadow of this transcendental object at the end of time.
I find it a little difficult to say what the subject matter is going to be, because
Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace.
Shake and bake, steps back, three-pointer, bang!
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Midnite Variety Hour. I'm Tom. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Adam, and we are here today for a very special episode of the podcast. Adam is wearing a beautiful shirt right now. I don't know if you guys have seen him wear this one before, but you look good
I think
today.
I might have worn this shirt before.
Yeah,
But
it's
thank
a
you,
very
man.
cool shirt.
Appreciate
It's
it.
kind of trippy. You've got it's almost like if someone were to look at a bandana on LSD, because it's kind of like that paisley pattern, but okay, it's crazy. Anyway, we're joined today by none other than Mr. Daniele Bolelli, a very acclaimed author, professor, master podcaster, just kind of like the most extraordinary character you could imagine. So he's easily one of our most exciting people we've ever had on the show. Mr. Bolelli, how are you doing today?
Good, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we are joined here. You're coming to us from Southern California, I believe. You're in the LA area. So
Correct, yes.
Thank God for the miracle of Zoom and being able to pull off video calls, because otherwise this wouldn't be possible. So, Adam, I know that you've been following Daniele's work for years. You said you've listened to every episode. I think you've read some of his books. How long have you been following Mr. Bolelli's work?
Well, since early Joe Rogan, I know you've been an early Joe Rogan guest, and he introduced me to you along with many other people. But when I first found out you started the History on Fire podcast, I was like, oh, hell yeah, I have to watch this, because some of the stories you were telling on there about like Ikkyo Sojin, or some of the early stories you were telling on the Joe Rogan podcast, I was just fascinated. I was like, whoa, who is that? Who is this? And I'm one of the kind of guys who, if I hear a name and it sounds interesting, I'm immediately Googling it. Who is this guy? Reading their wiki bio or whatever. And the fact that you came out and started History on Fire with detailed historical accounts of these people and events, it really just opened my world to history in general. I've always loved history, and the fact that we have someone like you, also Dan Carlin, who's done amazing work, who really put in hours and hours of work and research to bring these stories and to the public view. It's incredible, and I just really appreciate the work you've done, and it's inspired me in many ways. So Yeah.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
And one thing I really enjoy about History on Fire, and you've said it multiple times, is the amount of research that actually goes into it. I think I heard you one time say it's like 15 to 20 books worth of reading to put together some of these episodes. And it's just like, I love history, but I started listening to the show, and the first episodes are about the slave wars in Sicily and during that time. I had never heard I was never taught any of this in school. I graduated college in 2017. And I took, history courses and things like that, but I graduated with a communications degree, so I never really took too many extensive history classes. But I mean, just within like the first few minutes of listening to those podcasts, I was learning stuff I'd never heard of before. So it's really exciting to see someone doing that level of research, because otherwise I would never have known any of this stuff. But I wanted to ask you, I know your father was a philosopher, and you have like a really interesting background, but I was curious, what was your initial... what made you gravitate towards becoming a historian? Because not only are you a studier of history, but also martial arts history and religious history. What got you into loving history?
I think part of the deal is that it's, I grew up with, I remember as a kid, they would give me these books. They were pretty cool. They were actually fairly good historical books for kids, and they were beautifully illustrated.
Yeah.
So I could spend hours just looking at the images and imagining scenes and what this character is doing and what so-and-so is doing. They were just fantastic exercises for the imagination. So in that sense, I love history because it was tied to creativity for me. It was tied to imagination, imagining these other worlds kind of thing.
Right.
I didn't really think, like when I did college initially, I didn't do history. I went for anthropology, thinking it would be better. Turned out that it wasn't. But eventually when I started teaching, I realized, you know what, I need to expand the kind of stuff I can teach. And then I realized, oh man, I've always liked history. Has been always something that I enjoy reading. I enjoy knowing about it. So kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So then I did graduate school in history. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. But it was more like, I never thought of it as something I would do other than, I would read it because it's fun, because it interests me.
Right.
But eventually, when I started tying it to teaching, I was like, yeah, I think I should go a little deeper in order to be able to do that.
Yeah. I was listening to your Drunken Taoist podcast, and one of the things you were talking about is how, you're interested in martial arts and you're interested in history, but what makes these things important is their interconnectivity, within each other. And like, oh, you're interested in this, and you would never think, oh, you hear this guy and he has a strong Italian accent, but why is he so interested in Native American history? You would never think. So I know that you have a degree in American Indian Studies. I was curious, what made you gravitate towards that field of history? What was so enticing about American Indian history that drew you to it?
That is kind of a mystery in the sense that I cannot remember a time when I wasn't into it. And I don't remember why, because, I grew up in Italy, so it's like, who the hell knows?
Right.
The time I was, I don't know, 3, 4 something, I remember reading about native things. I remember all that. So I was like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Could be, who the hell knows? Could be comic books when I was a kid, could be whatever. But for some reason, much earlier than I can remember, something struck me about native culture in a way that I was fascinated by.
And I remember you did a Crazy Horse and a Sitting Bull series and a few others. And I recall, let me know if I'm mistaken, but did you participate or get to go to some of these communities and participate in some of the rituals and get to see what that life was like? And could you talk about that a little bit? Because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, sure. So because when I came to US, it was more of a personal interest. But of course, I grew up in Italy, so I don't have a direct contact with any of that. When I moved to US, instead, I did become friends with a few folks who are native. I did start becoming more involved in like kind of what was the reality on the ground versus what you read in a book. Mm-hmm. And it was very trippy in a lot of ways. I mean, one thing that in many native communities to this day, there are a ton of problems. Clearly, there are problems with poverty, there's problem with substance abuse, there are problems with a lot of things. But one thing that's fantastic is that even though it's really broken down and with 10,000 issues, you still do see a degree of community that you do not see in much of the rest of the United States. I mean, there are exceptions, of course. Some places you do see it, but typically you don't. And so there's something powerful about that. There's something really interesting about that interplay of community that you see in not everywhere, but in many native reservations.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's Native American history is something I've always been interested in, and of course, living in America, you know, it's a piece of history that's kind of like interwoven within all of our backgrounds. We all go to school learning a bit of Native American history, but obviously not as much as we should. So one of the things that I found really interesting was this past summer I drove to Utah, and we were kind of just making a bunch of stops along the way, and we had stopped in New Mexico, just outside of Albuquerque. They have this place called Petroglyphs National Monument, and there's all these petroglyphs in the rocks. And I forgot what year they said they were made, but I guess I never really realized how long the presence of Native Americans has been in the Americas, you know. And you always think about, like, you see cowboys and Indians, and you fucking see, like, you know, like the Lone Ranger with but you never think about how long Native Americans have actually been.
Yeah, and a lot of they don't have too many written down, you know, documents or recorded of their own history, other than myths and oral myths.
I guess the majority of, I mean, would you say oral history was the main? Because they weren't really big on writing down their history.
Yeah, there were, you know, most were not literate culture in that sense. There were some that are, well, some were, but of course, like, those were usually the ones, like, for example, conquered by the Spaniards, who decide to burn everything because it doesn't really matter to them. So there's a lot of loss there. And some are not exactly literate in the sense of, but they use, like, mnemonic devices. So you have things like a winter count, where maybe you have, like, things that help trigger the memory of the teller of a so it mixes with oral history, and at the same time it's not purely oral.
So one of the goals of, we started this show, we've probably only been going for about 2 months now, right? We're about 2 months into the show. But one of the reasons we started this show was because Adam and I, so we work together. We work at a little media company, and part of our job we have here is this podcast studio, so we use it. And we have these conversations while we're working on our computers, and we're talking about ethics and morality, but then sometimes we're talking about history, but sometimes we're talking about weird fucking animals we find on the internet. We just like talk about all kinds of stuff. But we wanted to make a show where we talk to people from all sorts of walks of life and kind of just discuss the human experience. Like, we are both fascinated by the human experience. And I think one thing Adam and I both wanted to talk to you about is, like, how you feel history kind of intertwines with the human experience. Because, I mean...
Well, I mean, that is the human experience, right? That's the interesting thing about history, is that anything that you're into, you're going to find something like that in history. You know, whether it's sports, whether it's whatever, you know, you're going to find that, because everything that ever happened to human beings is what history is.
Yeah.
So the cool thing about it is that it's a very, in that sense, open-ended field that allow you to dive into whatever topic you are into outside of history. You can find ammo for your conversation within it, you know, because you find all the history. That's the beauty of it, is that it's a lab of what it means to be human. You know, you get to see the experiments, how they have played out throughout history. Ideas that work well, ideas that didn't work well, who did what, and that's the beauty of it. You know, history to me is really about learning more what it means to be human.
Yeah. Right. Definitely. Yeah. And for me in particular, it really, history and just learning about historical accounts really gives me an appreciation for what it means to be human and what humans have gone throughout history. I mean, all of the wars and, you know, plagues and you name it, like, so much has happened to us, and yet we're still here and able to live in, like, especially right now in this time and era where we're extremely blessed, and it also gives me an interesting perspective of what it means to be human. Like, as far as like, you have these super interesting and fascinating characters, which I love that you bring and point out, Daniele, is some of these people like Caravaggio or Ikkyo Sojin who really stood out outside of the cultural norms and the boundaries that they were born into, and it really shows that we can transcend what we're born into, or the ideas of our age and time, and that we're not stuck into ways of thinking or ways of being, and it shows how complex and unique humans can be.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me. So.
Yeah, man, it's that's I think the fascination for it is that it's not one field; it's many fields. You are into economics, you'll find economics in history.
Yeah.
You are into sports, you find that. You are into whatever, from daily life, from sex to politics to and everything in between. Now, of course, one of the issues is that there's a little bit of a bias in the historical record, in the sense that the main things that you find are over and over and over again. You find a lot about politics, a lot about warfare, and not a whole lot about other things.
Right.
And that's kind of frustrating, because what you end up having is that it's a history mostly of sociopaths who are drunk with power, So the image of humanity you get from history is probably worse than the reality, because you hear so much. Because who are you hearing about? You're hearing about people who are obsessed with power, and it's all the power games that take place. You don't hear about somebody who's a sweet old lady and is nice and it's that's not what you hear about in history. So I am interested. That's like when you mentioned the EQ Sojun episode. I felt very strongly about the desire to shine the spotlight on somebody who was not involved in a war, didn't kill a bunch of people, was not a conqueror, was not a politician, was a guy who had a blast in life. Despite living through hard times, managed to have a blast.
Right.
Yes.
And I think there's often not enough of that in history.
Yeah, because it's amazing that you say about that stuff going unnoticed, because literally until I started following you, I'd never heard of him. I'm almost 26 years old, and I've, college educated, never heard of Ikkyo Sojun. So, I mean, it's an amazing story, and he was an amazing character, but because he's not linked to a war or some sort of plague or uprising or some sort of like governmental role, just not taught.
Yeah, and something also that I love that you do and point out, Daniele, is like you have a very objective perspective, and when you're telling history, and I think it's so important who's telling us or teaching us history, because we can a lot of times weave in our own personal bias and values or whatever into stories and things that can kind of manipulate like what happened and make it seem like something happened that it wasn't necessarily the way it happened, So, and that's what I love that you do is whenever I'm hearing the stories, I feel like you're coming from a very objective point of view where you're not giving you're purely giving the listener accounts, and you say, okay, this account did come from this person who probably had a beef with this guy, and they probably didn't like each other, and so he's probably going to tell a convoluted story. So it's really interesting and fascinating and I love that you bring that out and point that out, because a lot of times when we're watching a documentary or a TV series or whatever it is, they a lot of times are going to put things in there that didn't necessarily happen or are blown out of proportion or whatever, or don't even mention certain parts of a story.
Right.
And so I think it's really important the way you tell the story.
Yeah.
I think I don't really have attachment to any ideology. So to me, it's like, I'll believe and run with something if it makes sense based on the evidence. Otherwise, why should I stick to my guns about a certain ideological position when the evidence doesn't support it?
Right.
If an idea sounds good, but it doesn't pan out good in reality, why would I support it? It's like, I can say, well, that was a sweet idea, but clearly the evidence doesn't go there. So how can it be tweaked? Is it salvageable? Is there a way to turn it into something good or not? And if not, well, the evidence proved it wrong. There's no need to keep hammering on trying to get that going. So I don't actually really understand why so many people seem to operate from a different viewpoint. Like there's this desperate allegiance to an ideology, and then reality needs to fit in that pre-existing worldview at all costs, both when it does, because in some cases it does, and when it doesn't. I'm like, who cares? It's like, why should you stick to this one position at all costs?
Right. Right. And you mentioned, I think in the slave wars about Spartacus, and how like whether like conservatives and then like extreme right or whatever, kind of use him as their, a way to, manipulate things or like it's just fascinating how you can really start to see that with even in today and how we use historical accounts to, make arguments about one thing or another.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
And I think, maybe it's not maybe it's not so surprising, because the thing is that people, why is it that people are in love with ideologies? Because they give them a sense of identity. And the sense of identity in the face of an uncertain world is a powerful thing. It's something that is reassuring. It's something that, we talk about things like dogma is a bad thing, and I agree that is a bad thing, but I can understand its appeal. It's because it gives you something to fall back on in the face of the seeming randomness of reality, the confusion. It gives you a sense of belonging. It gives you a sense of a lot of things that human beings badly crave. So that's probably why, when you look at things like politics, that's why if you know somebody's position on abortion, you also know whether they think wearing masks is good or not, or what they think about global warming. That is like, they have nothing to do with one another. You know what I mean? There is no... So the only reason why you can predict somebody's positions is because they are stuck to a playbook, and it's like, what does my team say? Okay, I'm going to repeat all these things. And it's like, it's not really an individual process of picking and choosing what actually makes sense to you based on evidence. It's the process of just buying a set of clothing, a uniform that you're going to wear in all circumstances, which clearly is not the most intellectually honest thing ever.
And it's crazy because, right now, we just had an election literally just a few months ago, and it just feels like even after the election, it feels like I've never seen in my lifetime the country this divided. And you look on other sides of the fence and you're like, how do these two groups of people exist in the same country? And we're like, it just feels like people are clinging to there's two big camps, and both camps are so drastically different from each other. But so many people are so loyal to their side. They're like, okay, this is what my guy says, and I'm riding with this no matter what. And then even if that guy contradicts himself or, says something against the party's, they'll try and warp reality to make it fit into that box. And I don't even know what to attribute that to, but it seems like we are right now is an all-time high of people sticking to their guns and just backing themselves into their own little corner, and they're just ready to fight off. So it's really crazy. From a historian's point of view, looking at the way America is now, because I know you know a lot of American history, what do you think about the state the country's in right now? We talked about people clinging to their ideologies and things like that. It feels like right now we have two sides in this country. Both sides are clinging to their ideologies. They're not these politicians. You'll hear them go into Congress and they'll just every side will vote one way, no matter what. It's like, okay, these guys, we know they're going to fight no, they're going to vote no for this. We know these guys, they're just going to vote yes. We don't have to think about whether they will or they won't. We just know, okay, these 50 people, they're voting yes for this. What has it always been that way in America, or are we experiencing something that is unique to this time? Because right now it just feels like we have two sides that are drastically different, and they just refuse to agree about anything.
Yeah, it was interesting. When they first set up the American political system, there had been a discussion about not having political parties and kind of requiring people to run as individuals so that you wouldn't run into this kind of factionalism where you have to support your group no matter what.
Right.
That was a good idea. That clearly didn't pan out. And within 3 minutes, there were parties and there was the factionalism and there was all that stuff. I think a lot of it is just human nature. Human nature that, of course, specific historical events can heighten the process and make it worse, or at some periods in history can be a little more mellow and not quite as intense. I think the dynamics are there just based on the way the human psyche works, but the intensity of it all clearly varies depending on specific things. And right now, it's pretty bad, for sure.
Do you think we can rebound out of this? Because it seems like now we've set ourselves on this doomsday path to where this is just what the country's going to be forever, and it's only going to get more extreme until we have another civil war or something like. Do you see us bouncing back from the way we are right now?
I mean, there's definitely something that's new in history, and that's like both internet and social media, and the way that before people would read the newspaper and have a discussion about that with their 5 friends, and then the rest of the day they can move on, and think about something else. With social media, this stuff is on 24/7.
It follows you home.
Get into kind of discussions at any hour of the day with any number of strangers. So it's like a way to keep that fire going longer and more intense.
Yeah.
And clearly that's a problem because it's not producing great results.
Yeah.
What do you do though about it? Because it's like, what, do you ban politics on social media? That seems a bit of a problem in itself, right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't seem like a great solution either. But at the same time, the current course of things is not great. So it's like, what do we do with it? Not that clear. Like the problem is clear, the solution is not.
Right.
So that's where it's like, where do we go with this?
Yeah, I don't even know how you would go about removing politics from social, because now social media is just so saturated in politics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's just like every politician has a platform on like 5 different, they all have a fucking Snapchat. They all have an Instagram. Like presidents with Snapchats and Instagrams. And it's like, I feel like one day down the line, we're going to look at textbooks and like in the textbooks are just going to be tweets and shit like that from,
Pretty much.
Yeah. So it's crazy.
Yeah, and then you mentioned this as well, Daniele, before, I think maybe on Rogan or something. It was like how there's these echo chambers now where if you're on whatever belief and you follow these certain people and then you have advertisements who are directed to certain consumers or whatever, it's you're only hearing what you want to hear and you're not getting any other perspective, which is so dangerous to like especially the human mind, where if that's what you're seeing, it's basically just conditioning you to continue to follow down that one path instead of creating. This is why I love history is you can see so many different perspectives of lives and different things that have happened throughout history, and you can really start to see, oh, the way we're living today, it doesn't have to be this way. And the way and so that part is fascinating to me too.
Yeah, but I mean,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's just like so many people it's like I feel like a lot of people recognize that problem, but people are so reluctant to change the way life is structured. People only see it like it can only be this way.
Yeah.
And it's just, I feel like we just need some sort of structural change, or something like that.
Yeah, which is, clearly easier said than done, right?
Yeah,
otherwise we would do it and no problem. It's complicated. It's like, how do you do, like one of the problems, for example, of communication on social media, which in some way is great because it allows you to connect to people you would never meet otherwise. But at the same time, precisely because you don't meet people face to face, communication where it's just words typed somewhere versus when it's face to face is completely different.
Yeah.
People tend to, if you are in the same room with somebody, I mean, things can go wrong always, but there's a tendency to be able to relate to somebody on a human level a little bit more.
Yes.
There's a tendency to understand where they are coming from a little bit more. There's more empathy that can develop, not necessarily, but it can. In social media, that just does not happen.
No.
And so within 3 minutes, forget 3 minutes, within one exchange, it quickly devolved into, you suck, I hope you burn in hell.
Yeah.
Not the most productive use of time ever for anybody, because on one end you can say, oh, okay, people get to vent. Okay, there's a function for venting. But I think some of that venting actually just stokes the fire even more, and then it increases the temperature. So it's not just, you get it out of your system and you're done. You get it out of your system, but that feeds another cycle and the bigger one and so on and so forth. So I'm like, I've seen like some news sites that have completely got rid of comments on their articles. Yeah. Which is huge, because if you think about how always, you wanted people to comment on your article and have discussion and this and that. And I've seen major sites go like, fuck it, it's not worth it. People are too dumb to do this in an effective way. This is just bad for everybody.
Right. I mean, in a perfect world, like in a vacuum, it seems like that would be great, right? We have this resource that allows you to connect with the entire world, and there's an infinite amount of information, and everyone can post their feedback and share, and you can like or dislike it, you can give your thoughts, but then you start to find out people fucking suck, and this is why we can't have good things, and somehow it just devolves into this thing that's just like oozing toxicity. So I mean, on paper it's great, but maybe it would be better if we had a world where all of the information was presented there, but you had no option to be like, there was no comment section. There was no.
You know what it reminds me of is like, what you talk about, Daniele. Like if a leader or someone is wanting to go to war, like they should be willing to fight in that war. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
like
totally.
same thing with typing your crazy messages on social media. If you're not willing to say that in front of someone's face,
Right.
in person to person, then you probably shouldn't be saying it, right? Like,
Big time. Big time.
Yeah, we have all these leaders that are just like these rich old guys just sitting in a dark room, you know, like, oh, we'll attack these people, we'll send our troops there. But it's like, imagine a world where we picked our leaders based on like, all right, this guy, like Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is our president because we're like, all right, if he has to go and fight, you know, the guy over there in Afghanistan or whatever, we know he'll take care of business. So it's just interesting that they're just sending people to do their bidding while they're just like these old shriveled up dudes sitting in these dark rooms just like pushing buttons and pulling triggers. So yeah, I think world leaders should have to fight or send their own children or something.
You know, some of it is a system that, I mean, on one hand, it would be easy to say, oh, it's a system that's designed to benefit the people at the top. Of course, all systems that are hierarchical tend to be that way. But at the same time, even the people at the top, if you look at like the wealthiest of the wealthy, most of the time they are miserable. So it seemed to be a weird game where the system itself is not really designed for human happiness.
Right.
And the substitute for happiness is just, I want to make a lot of money, have a lot of things, and at least feel better about myself by looking at the numbers in my bank account. But when you're talking about actual what's desirable for humans, this is not only is not good for the people at the bottom of the society, it's not even good for the people at the top who are doing more of the exploiting and all of that. It's just even they tend to be miserable most of the time.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, wait, then why are we doing it? That's just dumb. And I think it's one of the problems is that learning how to create a happy lifestyle is very difficult. It's something that most human beings don't know how to do. And even if they do know how to do, structurally, there are things that stand in the way. Because, I mean, one thing that human beings need badly is contact with other human beings. You know, we're social animals. We're built to live in tribes. We're built for family, extended family, community. Modern life, particularly in US, is going in the exact opposite direction. It's all about isolation, individualism. And again, there's something good about individualism, but taken to the extreme, it just makes people lonely and ultimately depressed.
Yeah.
So it's like you're there sitting on your pile of money alone and just like you hug your PlayStation and screw the rest of the world. And it's like, that does not look like the best possible life one can have.
Yeah. And I think it's really important, especially like in your formative years, like as a kid, you know, like we were both born in the early to mid 90s. And, you know, we grew up, I think, probably in the last generation of kids that were like playing outside every day. There was like a whole neighborhood full of kids. We talk about this all the time on the show. Like we were playing outside literally from like when we got home from school until it got dark outside. But now you just have kids that they come home. And now kids are like not even going to school. They're just doing distance learning with COVID. But they're coming home, and if they want to hang out with their friends, they'll just get online and just play video games online. And now video games are being made. Most video games are made without even the ability to play local multiplayer. You have to just purely play online. Yeah. And so I feel like it's starting from when kids are like super young now. Kids that are being born are literally having their entire childhood predicated around like a world of being removed and just communicating via the internet. And I'm like, I kind of shudder to think what it's going to be like when those kids are 20, 30, 40, and it's just been what everyone has been living. I feel like we're just going to become such a removed society. Because, I mean, now with COVID, so many people are working from home, and a lot of companies are saying, like, hey, we might not come back to the offices. You know, if your position can be done purely online, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years from now, after COVID is done, you might just keep working online. And it's like, I mean, what do you see that doing to society if we kind of evolve into this group of people and everyone is just, from the time they're a child, just growing up in this world where you're just removed and that's just your norm? And what does that do to humanity, you know?
I think it can be both good and bad, because on one hand you highlighted the bad, definitely, about how it can lead to just even more alienation, even less contact with human beings, which is already bad as it is. So you make that even worse, is a disaster. On the other hand, it frees up a lot of time for people to do something else with their lives. So if they are, it's removing something from people's lives, which is a lot of contact with other people, but also a lot of bullshit commuting and sitting in an office to do a job that you could do in 2 hours, spending 8 hours a day, and all of that stuff. The question is, what do you replace it with? Because it's pretty clear what you get rid of, but like the potential is that you can replace it with fun stuff. If you turn it into, we never meet at the office, but the whole work team will spend 2 weeks in Hawaii every year, hanging out. You get to meet people, you work. That could actually be good. And then you have all this time during the year to pursue other interests where you create community because you have more time to spend doing stuff you actually love.
Right.
Potentially, again, it's one of those things. It can go, and it probably will go 2 ways.
Right.
It's going to make things worse and it's going to make things better. The question is how much of each. The question is of proportion.
That's what worries me. I worry that balance is going to be more towards the negative.
Well, unfortunately, that's kind of a given in most human activity, because if you look at what the average person does, if you look at where the common denominator is, it does not tend to fall on the high end of the spectrum. It tends to fall into the making a use of things that tend to. That does not mean that a sizable percentage of the population is not going to have a blast with this and cannot create something wonderful. The question is it 30%, 40%, or 5%? Because that makes a difference. And I think that's kind of where a lot of things are. Most innovations open the door to things going in both directions at the same time.
Yeah.
And the question is just how many people go one way or the other.
Yeah.
Right. Talking about like the quality of human life, some of the characters that you've talked about in History on Fire really seem to trend towards like living these fascinating, adventurous, or wild lives where they can definitely be dangerous and crazy. And it seems like, wow, like I wouldn't want to experience seeing someone either die or experiencing suffering, like extreme suffering and loss. But there's some kind of like when I listen to it, it's some kind of like something mystical or something like spontaneous, or that's something that really sparks like, man, what if I would live that life or was put in that position?
Right.
Like I obviously wouldn't want to go through something like extremely bad, but there's also something that says, well, maybe there's something to that. Maybe there's something to being a human and experiencing those kind of events where like now everything seems to be nerfed. You know what I mean? We're all living comfortable. Well, at least a lot of people do. Obviously there's still many places around the world where, people are suffering, but when we look at history in particular, I mean, obviously we didn't have technology and a lot of comforts that we do today. And I look at like some of these events in life and it seems like, man, that sucks, a lot of the stuff that they went through. But was it an exciting, like fulfilled life? And that brings me to the quote that you brought up one time by Friedrich Nietzsche, where he says, of all that is written, I love only what a person has written with his blood. And it kind of points to that kind of life where it's like they really put their life on the line, or their human experience was just all out, And I don't know, maybe you can speak on that, Daniele, but that's one thought I had.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, even in a more affluent, more comfortable society, everybody will deal with a lot of pain. That's just how it is. That's just the existential nature of life, is that it's based on loss. You lose the things you love. You lose pieces of yourself along the way. You reach a physical top shape and it inevitably declines. You deal with sickness, you deal with death, you deal with old age, So to one degree or another, everybody deals with a mountain of crap and pain and things that are really harsh.
Yeah.
So in that sense, looking at people who deal with it to the 10th power, can serve almost as inspiration, as like, if this person can handle this much,
Right.
what I need to deal with is half of that or a quarter or something.
Yeah.
It's still a lot. It still feels like a lot. It's still kicking my ass, but maybe it can like almost help you develop that muscle to help figure out how to handle it, how to deal with it. So that's why I think people are fascinated to see how people handle extreme situations, because extreme situations are only a more intense version of what people go through in daily life.
Right.
You know, everybody goes through hard things, period. And some people go through harder things. So it's like, okay, well, you get to a more dramatic representation of the stuff you deal with.
Yeah. And to see people like the Crazy Horse series, like the amount of crazy loss that he had in his life and is able to overcome it. But then he did have that moment where he went on that crazy like murderous spree where he just went and just wanted to kill and just to I guess satisfy whatever that was in his heart. But like to see and hear those kind of events, it really have changed my life in many ways. When I just look at like my life and I'm like, man, I have it good. You know, like I cannot complain about, you know, if I was born in that time or experienced that kind of, you know, insanity. It's really crazy.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's one of those things that I think that's why people like, you know, you don't watch movies about just a normal average person. You don't read the history about perfectly normal things. You read more extreme things. You know, we are drawn to that drama because we know it could be us. To some degree, it is us. And it's just taking those dynamics to the limit, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, you hear a lot of people, they talk about, you know, how, things are so horrible right now. We're dealing with COVID and, you know, racial tensions and, I hate the president or I love the president or whatever. And they talk about how awful things are. But, I mean, from a historian's point of view, do you think, I mean, you could also argue this is the greatest time it's ever been to be human, you know? I mean, what do you think about the way things are right now? Do you think this is, you know, pound for pound, like the greatest time to have ever been alive? Or do you think there are times that are greater and right now things are actually pretty shitty? I mean, because it seems weird to think that now could be worse than other times because we all walk around with a computer in our pocket, and even if you're relatively poor, you probably have some sort of a car and some sort of a roof over your head. Right, electricity and running water, and we've relatively got a handle on diseases. Like there's not smallpox, we've cured polio, stuff like that. But I mean, at the same time, there are things about society right now that I'm sure are worse than, you know, they have been before. So what do you think about the state of human living right now? I mean, would you say, if you had a scale of the greatest time to be alive, the worst time to be alive as a human, where do we fall right now? What do you think?
I think it's tricky because it's in terms of being affluent, having access to things, clearly today is better than many, 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 many other times.
Right. And I guess it also depends where you are, right? Because
it very much depends where you are.
There's points in time where it's shit to be somewhere, but you could be living in the golden ages somewhere here. So, you know.
Oh, absolutely. And even now, I mean, there are a bunch of places in the world that you're kind of screwed if you are born there.
Right.
It's a bad deal. And if anything, it probably was better at other times in history. Yeah. But generally speaking, I think the problem is that, again, even being more affluent, even having more access to things, doesn't necessarily translate into happiness. Now, it's clearly better than if, you know, half of the people you know are dying of the Black Plague and you don't have clean water to drink. That's a problem, a real one.
Mm-hmm.
And good luck being happy under those circumstances.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when it's not that extreme, there are a bunch, like today, you look at the level of use of antidepressants, people who are bummed, people who are lonely, people, it's off the charts in the most affluent society on earth ever.
Yeah.
So it's like, that clearly is not translating in a higher quality of life in terms of overall satisfaction with it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like mental illness right now is something that's like really talked about, and depression and anxiety are very like talked about things now, where I don't remember that being a thing before. But it also seems like more people are depressed now, or at least vocally depressed, than I've ever seen before. I don't know if that's like a product of like just the society we live in now, where like media is constantly like being beamed into people's head and they like can't get away from it even when they go home. But I mean, do you feel like people are more depressed now than they have been? Or is that just like we just didn't know about it back then? But I just feel like chronic depression is like so much more prevalent now than it was before.
I think on a level, there are multiple levels to that. For one, I think the speed at which life has changed is probably too much for us to get a grasp on. I mean, if you look at if you take somebody from the early 1800s and you drop them back 800 years earlier, they would notice a difference for sure. But it wouldn't be as dramatic as from somebody from the early 1800s to the early 1900s, or from the early 1900s to today. So I think there's just a speed at which things have changed that is more than we have been able to adapt to.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely at the roots of a lot of problems. That is just, it's too much. It's like we haven't, like internet, fantastic, except it comes with all these problems. And we haven't had the time to metabolize it and figure out, okay, how do we keep the best out of this stuff without dealing with all the crap that it brings? Same thing with, social mobility, individualism. Great, it's awesome to some degree. And then there are problems that come with it. So we haven't really figured out how. So we are there sitting on some great things. And at the same time, we lost so much along the way and haven't figured out the right balance that it's almost inevitable,
Yeah.
Right.
It's crazy to think about, man.
Yeah, well, we really want to respect your time, Daniele, and I think we have maybe a few minutes left. And I wanted to ask you, is there, because I think for me, a lot of people, especially with the topic of history, don't appreciate it or just don't really understand the value that it can bring in someone's life. And and I think it's because maybe they just weren't told stories that maybe inspired them or something like that. So I was wondering if there is maybe a person or an event or something maybe that you can give maybe a brief story or something that can maybe inspire somebody to maybe check out History on Fire or just learn about history more.
I mean, if sort of what we were saying earlier, if we stay away from the meat of most of history, which is also the meat of a lot of what I touch on History on Fire, which is more the drama and the war and the conflict and all that stuff. A story like the EQ story is fantastic because here is a guy who didn't have it easy. He grew up as the illegitimate son of the Emperor of Japan. In order to avoid possible palace conspiracies designed to get rid of him, his mom had to put him in a Zen monastery when he was 5 years old. So he basically grew up with no parents in the severe environment of a Zen monastery. He gets pretty depressed at some point, even suicidal. He goes through some stuff, but then he finds a way to have a blast. I mean, the guy's understanding of Zen is phenomenal. But beyond that, he finds a way to just enjoy life in a society that was very rigid, didn't really give much room to the individual. EQ is as free as it gets. It does not let any kind of social constraints. He lives with next to nothing. He lives with very little, but he looks really free and really happy.
Right.
And so to me, stories like somebody like that is inspiring because he's not somebody who has everything handed out on a golden platter. He's dealing with the same kind of crap that many of us deal with. And at the same time, he finds a way to make it work. And it's fantastic.
Yeah. Wow.
Awesome.
Well, I think that's going to be the next thing I listen to now. Is that now I'm just going to go listen to the IQ story because I think we could all strive to live like that. You know,
totally.
Fuck all the material stuff. He just seems like such an eccentric, cool dude. So I want to definitely listen to that. We know you have to go soon. So one thing I just wanted to circle back on before you go. You were talking about, with everything becoming more distance with COVID and all that. We have so much more free time now because we're not commuting to work. And, Adam's brother had a baby that was born right before COVID. So he got to just be at home with his baby all the time. And him and his wife never had to go to work. So it was great. and one of the things I've been replacing my time with is reading. And so I'm very interested in martial arts. So I plan on picking up on the Warrior's Path, because I know you are a devoted studier of martial arts history, and you're a martial arts practitioner yourself, which I find is really interesting. And I know we can't touch on all of it, so hopefully one day you come back on the show. But I wanted to ask you, you're a professor. What has that been like with COVID? And also, what are you filling your time with now that, because I mean, you're a father, you're a professor, you're a podcaster, you're an author, you're a martial artist. First of all, I don't even know how you had time to come and talk to us today, but like, what are you doing with your time now that everything is so crazy, but maybe you have more time, because you're not teaching?
It's great because, I'm not commuting and all of that. I like that. And also, had it happened when I first started teaching, I would have hated it. Now I've been teaching for 20 years. I don't really need to be in the classroom all the time.
Yeah.
But time management is a big problem, because I do. And again, nobody put a gun to my head and forced me to do all these things.
Right.
But I am committed to a lot of things.
Yeah, I'm sure it's really a fulfilling life to be able to do so many things,
And, there's a balance, right? Because on one end, it's great to be able to do a lot of things. On the other end, there's a point where it's just too much. You're doing too many things and you're constantly playing catch up. So it's a tricky balance. I definitely love being able to spend a lot of time with my daughter. That's great.
Yeah.
I like that. The other stuff, I feel that I'm constantly trying to catch up. I'm like, I'm correcting exams so that once they are done, I can finally focus on History on Fire. So that when that's done, I can finally focus on writing a book I want to write. And so it's a little bit intense in a way.
But by all means, keep giving us more content, because we love everything that you're creating. So please don't stop. Please always find time to keep doing your thing. It's been an honor talking to you. Hopefully, I know you're busy, but maybe one day, a few months from now, maybe you'll come back on the show, because I really want to talk with you about martial arts and jiu-jitsu and, and kung fu and just everything that you're into. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for your time. Thank you for introducing me to people in history I would have never heard of before. And just keep kicking ass, honestly. Like, thank you for just being a fucking kick-ass guy. You were really awesome.
Yeah, really appreciate your time, Daniele.
Yeah.
And if there's anything else you want to share before we go, how people can maybe reach out or find more of your content, let them know.
Good. Oh, there's a couple of episodes, because right now, History on Fire, I'm only doing a couple of episodes on all platforms. Like most of all the archives are out there for free, but most of the new episodes are on Luminary. But there are 2 episodes coming up in May that are going to be about Bruce Lee. And they're going to be
nice.
My idol.
So they're going to be released all over the place. So that should be fun.
Nice. Yeah, you appeared in a Bruce Lee documentary, I think. So, which I could spend another 45 minutes talking to you about Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee is my idol. So, wow. Yeah, that was great. So anytime you want to come back on, and we'll make sure we send you the link so you can check out the podcast later if you feel like sharing it or anything like that. We'll make sure we give it to you.
Awesome.
And just thank you for your time, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. And I've been watching you do like leg locks and stuff, so I'll practice some jiu-jitsu tonight. Watch your videos, okay?
Cool. You guys have a great one.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Oh, my God, man. That was great. That was really great.
I'm on cloud right now. Cloud 9 right now. And just super excited we got to do that and had that opportunity. And it was amazing. He took time out of his busy schedule to come on and just talk with us and we get to share this with the world, man. Pretty exciting.
We're playing with the big dogs now, man. We're getting some really awesome guests. I'm really excited for people to hear what we have in the works for this show. I really think we're having like some conversations with people that a lot of people will hopefully, I hope people really enjoy these conversations, because we're having fun doing it. So
yeah. And I genuinely think, like, not trying to, blow us up or make us anything, greater than what we are. We're just 2 average guys, but I feel like we think deeply about topics and we want to dive deeper into understanding things. And, I think there's real value in that, and having in us being like that, we're going to find people who are similar and want to talk about deeper conversations and topics that you're not going to get at your everyday, living room conversation. So
do we have an email for the show? Okay.
Oh, no, we do have an email. Sorry, yes,
I thought we did.
I created an email. Yes,
okay.
yes.
email us. Tell us who you want to see on the show. We can't
Yes.
promise we'll get them, but we'll try. You know, I mean, I feel like, you know, a lot of the times we're talking to like our friends and stuff like that, but we're trying to, Adam and I are planning to start speaking with professors and things like that and people who are in different fields and from different walks of life. So if you listen to the show and you enjoy the show, but there's a certain topic you want to hear discussed or something you want to hear discussed with a certain person, let us know. Shoot us an email. We'll put the email on screen or it'll be in the description or somewhere. And just let us know who you guys want us to talk to because, I mean, shit, I'll talk to anybody. I can usually find something enjoyable to talk about with anyone. So what a life, man. What a day. What a fucking day to be alive.
Yeah, our email address is midnitevariety@gmail.com.
Wow, that's so simple. How could you forget that? Midnitevariety@gmail.com.
Midnight, and then night is spelled with the N-I-T,
Spelled
just
the
like
same way the show is
Yeah,
spelled.
so-
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Midnitevariety@gmail.com. Send us an email and we'll get to your favorite guest on the air. I think, yeah.
So what were some of your favorite topics or things that Daniele brought up, and did he make you think about anything differently?
Yeah,
or?
I've really loved the part of the conversation we were having about people like clinging to their ideologies and like just refusing to budge and stuff like that. Because I mean, shit, that is something that I notice every day. You know, people clinging to ideologies and refusing to have an open mind about anything. People are just so argumentative now. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I love that too, because that was and is a common theme on this show is understanding why people think the way they do or don't think the way they do. You know what I mean? And
Right.
and so and he has a very unique perspective. And I was telling you this after the show as well, was I feel like he has. I don't know if he feels this way, but it sometimes it feels like that, like almost like he has a duty or a responsibility to kind of share his perspectives, and maybe not so, you know, not so like important or
Right.
as I'm making it seem, but like in a way, kind of, because he has so much knowledge and a depth of, you know, understanding of what humans have gone through and the experiences we've gone through. So he has a unique perspective that a lot of people
Right.
don't,
Yeah.
and he's in that very small niche of people who we should look to for answers or
Right.
or just insight on certain topics. But hey, like,
Yeah.
I mean, you have so much knowledge. Like, tell us, like, what do you think about that? And,
Right.
and he's also that kind of person who loves to have that conversation. So it's like the fact
Yeah.
that he did that and came on with this is just amazing.
And I feel like that's such a human role. Like, you know, like throughout time, there's been people that were like, okay, this guy's job in the village is like, he's the oral history keeper.
Yeah.
This guy knows the stories. He is like keeping
Right.
mental track of everything that's happened to our people. And
Right.
if you need to know about something that happened through time, you go to this guy. And it's like, he's the modern day history keeper. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, like a lot of these
Totally.
stories would fall by the wayside unless we had people doing stuff like that. So, which is crazy to think that like so many people just like don't really think about history. Like so many people live through their life without thinking about the past and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, and I think it could really help with just real life situations. Like,
Yeah.
for example, like we were talking about loss and, you know, suffering.
Right.
I mean, that alone, like you have that experience in your life.
Yeah.
If you don't have any other historical accounts to pull from or draw from
Yeah.
or to think about or just ponder and like, man, how are people dealing with that? Or what were some certain stories or experiences that people went through that can relate to my life, and get some kind of inspiration or some kind of learning experience that it can dramatically influence today in your life, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What were some of your favorite things that we talked about?
I just love the fact that he brought up Ikkyo Sojin I think I may have mentioned his name first, but at the end when I asked him
Yeah.
to mention his story, because I feel like that's what it's all about when we talk about like history, is like these stories and
Right.
these because I mentioned it too in the podcast, was that I really feel like it's important for people to find at least a story or an event that they can relate with or find interesting or fascinating, because that will open up the door for more of those
Right.
stories and conversations. And so yeah, I love that he brought that up.
I feel like no matter who you are, like no matter what you're into, what your interests are, what like walk of life you come from, you can find something in history that resonates with you, and you can kind of latch onto that and explore it further and benefit somehow from it. I mean, I just
Yeah.
feel like people are like, oh, history's lame, history's boring. Why would I want to learn about some shit that already happened? I think everyone, I have to burp. Sorry. Yeah, I just feel like everyone has something that's happened in some point in time, some sort of either historical figure or historical story or an event or something like that that resonates with them that they can latch onto, you know?
Yeah.
So, and it could be something as early as something that happened in the early 20th century or mid 20th century, because I mean, that's history too. Or it could be something from, you know, the before Common Era days when, you know, which it's really interesting.
And even if it's just purely for entertainment value, it still has a value. Like, even if it's just purely you just want to listen to it or watch something like The Gladiator or like Gladiator, the movie. Like, I mean, a lot of people probably don't care too much about the historical accounts or whether if it was true or the things that happened.
They just want to see people getting their heads cut off and like, oh, let's see some fucking gladiators, yeah.
Right, and even if it's for that value, purely entertainment, I still think it holds value. Obviously, you know, I would love if people thought deeper on the subject and topics of, but you know, there's value in all of this that you know that we mentioned. So,
and what's interesting is like I feel like people are so they can like so easily get wrapped up in these worlds that don't exist. Like you have these people that are like Lord of the Rings super fans
or Game of Thrones
super fans, which is interesting because Daniele Bolelli, I believe, is also a
Game
of Thrones fan.
he loves Game of Thrones, yeah.
Game of Thrones super fans, Lord of the Rings super fans. If you just look back in the history of this world that actually exists, there are stories way crazier than some of the fiction, you know, that I mean like truth is stranger than fiction, and you can look back on human history and find some shit that like makes Lord of the Rings look like average, you know? Like,
yeah, I mean, even on the topic of like wild fantasy craziness, I mean, I just mentioned to you the Taiping Rebellion earlier.
Yeah.
And if anyone doesn't know about the Taiping Rebellion, crazy.
Which I didn't. Which is nuts because it wasn't even that long ago. I mean, we're talking about it was happening. Like it ended, I think, in 1864, which means it was happening while the Civil War was going on.
Oh, yeah.
Which we are all very familiar with.
Yeah.
So this was happening at the same time.
Yeah, and so you want to talk about crazy? There was this guy who basically got super sick and had visions. I don't know if he was sick, but something happened to where he was having crazy visions, and he claimed that he had a vision from God. God told him that he was, and we were talking about the Christian God because there were Christian missionaries there in China at the time, and I guess he was influenced somehow by that and had some visions, and God told him that you are the Son of God and you are Jesus's little brother. Now go do the Lord's work. Go do the Lord's work. And he goes out, creates a massive army, creates a giant civil war in China. The lower estimates say 20 to 30 million people died. Higher upper estimates say 100 million people died, which is insane to think about. One guy just has a crazy vision and creates this giant war. I mean, you talk about crazy and wild and fantasy. That can be a movie, documentary, TV show, whatever you want, and it'll be freaking wild. So,
how many people died in the American Civil War? How many do you think?
I don't think that many, actually. Well, comparative to like a World War I or II or something like that.
I'm just curious because American Civil War death count.
I don't know.
I'm just interested because, okay, the first thing that pops up when you Google, it's about 620,000. Okay.
Yeah, so not even a million.
So, and that's like, it was the deadliest war okay, so in all of America's wars, about 1.2 million people died. Okay.
All of them combined.
Yeah. 620,000 from the Civil War. But if you add them all up together, about 1.2 million.
Including world wars, or?
It says all of the nation's wars, 1.2 million. That's what it says.
Wow. So, I mean, that just gives you a perspective.
Here's a breakdown for you, okay? And this is just Americans, okay? This is not total fatality. This is just Americans.
Yeah.
About 405,000 in World War II.
Wow.
116,000 in World War I, 58,000 in Vietnam, 36,000 in Korea.
So, yeah, I mean, those numbers are minuscule.
Right.
Compared to a war like the Taiping Rebellion.
So we're talking about all of America's wars added up together. 1.2 million people died.
Yeah.
And we're talking about something that was happening in the 1800s where at least 20 million people died. 20 times. Yeah. Maybe as much as 100 million.
Yeah. It's so hard to document those deaths because a lot of, I mean, obviously people are still living in villages and communities like that where there were no census, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's so hard to tell, but still, even those estimates are just mind-boggling. But yeah, I mean, there's stuff like that throughout history, all over history, man. I mean, you go as far back as like the Mongols and, you know, the Mongol Empire. You go back to, like even the Greek wars and
Right.
stuff like that, man. It's fascinating stuff that I just feel like has so much value and weight, and it's just so fascinating to understand where humans have been and where we're going. And,
Right.
And Daniele mentioned that as well, as like a lot of history was, written based on political perspectives or wars or things like that, because that's just who was writing things down and recording histories. Like, I mean, you go back to like Herodotus was like the father of history or whatever they call him. Like a lot of his early works were purely wars or political type writings. And I mean, yeah, that stuff is super fascinating. And he mentions like, yeah, it gives human, like almost like a kind of the human history, like kind of a grim, outlook, because that's all you can really get. And I mean, at least a lot of the early works, but still fascinating stuff, man.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, damn, I'm still like trying to process everything, man. It was really,
Yeah.
I learned a lot just in that 45-minute span that we were talking, and like probably go learn some more after this. I definitely plan on picking up at least one of his books this weekend.
Yeah.
I just finished Do Androids Dream of
Oh,
Electric Sheep
nice.
by Philip K. Dick,
Yep.
otherwise known as the book that Blade Runner was based on.
Yep.
Way wilder than I thought it was going to be.
Dude, Philip K. Dick was. Do you know he used to have like visions as well, and like
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
crazy like experiences,
Yeah.
and you can really see that in his book. When you're like at one part, you'll just be randomly going along like the storyline, and then something happens to one of the
Right.
characters, and like the room starts to
Right.
dissolve,
Right.
and like people start to like shape into weird things,
Right.
and like it just turns into a psychedelic experience, and you're like, what the hell?
I mean,
am
I went into
reading?
it thinking like, all right, so I'd seen Blade Runner, and I was like, okay, I'm pretty familiar with
Yeah.
the film, and I went into the book thinking, all right, it's going to be about this badass cop retiring fucking androids, putting them in the dirt. And then, like, you start getting into all this stuff about Mercerism, people with their empathy boxes, like connecting with, fusing with Mercer, and like simultaneously experiencing what he's experiencing on this like trek up this mountain, and it's just like you're just like reading something, and it just seems like a normal story, and then bam, he's fused with Mercer, and he's on a mountain somewhere getting rocks thrown at him.
Yeah, dude.
So it was crazy. Anyway, so I need a new book because
I just read on Philip K. Dick. I literally just finished Palmer Eldritch and the Three Sigmatas. I think the name of the book is.
So
And
sounds like a band.
yeah,
That sounds like a wild band. Think about
it's
it.
a wild book, and that book was, I mean, it's just like I literally couldn't keep up with the storyline
Yeah.
because it was so much happening. Like I'm gonna have to go back and watch like a YouTube video breakdown or something of the book, because like there was so much, like, because there was like this drug that they were taking, and they would like go into this psychedelic experience, but then you didn't know if it was reality or not. So like the story would keep going
Right.
after he takes whatever drug it was, and then he ends up in this other world, but then he thinks he's back, but you don't know if he's really back from the experience
he's
or
still
not.
in it.
Or-
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
so it's just playing with your
Is it
reality
hard to
so much.
follow? Is it-
It's not necessarily hard to follow more than it is just playing with your sense of like reality.
And he's
you
good
know.
he's good
Yeah.
with writing like that. Like,
yeah.
you know, if the wrong writer tried to tackle something like that, it would get muddy and like you wouldn't really know what's happening. But I feel like Philip K. Dick is really good about establishing those types of
For sure.
universes. Maybe I'll pick up another Philip K. Dick book.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know.
you should. And he has a ton of short stories
Yeah,
that are like you can read them in under an hour,
yeah.
and they're all fascinating, like really cool sci-fi, crazy stuff. That he has a lot of work. I don't know the amount of books he has, but there's a lot of work he published
Yeah.
before he died. A lot.
I'm starting to find that, I've just like kind of like browsed through, because he's one of the authors that I like. So I'm like, oh, what can I find in his catalog that I want to read? Huge body of work.
Yeah.
And I've kind of found that I don't like fucking long books. Like I don't like books. Like, you know, I like Game of Thrones and, you know, the Song of Ice and Fire series.
You've read Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I just don't really like when books are like 700 pages long. I really have found I enjoy like a 250-page book.
Mm-hmm.
It's not long, but it's not a short story. You can get through it in, you know, a small amount of days. It's like a nice story that's usually paced the way that I like. That's like the link. That's why I liked Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, because it's like 230 pages or whatever. That's a good length book for me. I don't know why, but I just can't. I don't really, no matter what the subject matter is, I don't necessarily like reading books that are like 700 pages long.
For me, like with movies, if I see that the movie's like an hour and a half, I'd be like, it's probably gonna suck. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I mean, I do too.
Like, if
That's
it's not
weird
at
how you-
least like a 2-hour
Right.
movie, because to me that feels like maybe there's not enough content, there wasn't enough good things to
Right.
put in the movie, and so, but like with a book, I'm like, I haven't established like what
Right.
like amount is like a healthy amount, or what's like how to judge a book
Right.
based on how much, because I've read so much, but I don't know, it's just interesting you brought that up because I haven't really thought about
Yeah,
it.
I just know that that's what I like. I like.
Yeah.
I feel like I like that pace when a book is that, whatever. So anyway, I'm gonna go book shopping this weekend, and I'll probably pick up
Dude,
some Bolelli. I'll probably pick
Oh,
up
yeah.
some Philip K. Dick, and yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna fucking sit on my patio and read and enjoy being alive, because
Definitely.
being alive is fucking awesome.
Definitely pick up some Daniele. And honestly, dude, if you want to come over and just look through my book collection, I have a pretty good amount
Yeah.
of books that if you want to borrow one or you see one that's interesting,
For sure.
because I mean, I'm more than happy to lend some to you.
Okay,
and
cool.
vice versa. I would love to go see your book collection and see what you got. And
Yeah.
I like the hard copies. I do have a Kindle.
I can't do it.
Yeah, I have a Kindle, and I have like maybe like 5 books on the Kindle that I've read. But yeah, I just love the
Is
hard
that the
copies.
one that has the
so.
screen that looks
Yeah.
like paper, or is
Yeah.
that the Nook?
It's the one that
okay.
looks like paper, which is really cool. I genuinely enjoy it, like the way it looks.
You can read it in the sun. It doesn't.
It
yeah,
really looks like paper, and it has like anti-reflection. So if you're out in the sun, like reading,
by the pool or something, you can fucking read normally.
it works. But yeah,
And just about every book is available, right? I mean, like, have you ever
Yeah.
run into a book that's not an ebook? I
Yes.
just feel like
Yes, I have.
Really? Okay.
okay, that's only because I'll look for some random crazy book that I
Right.
saw, and I'm like, it may not be like if it's a popular book, I'm sure it's on there, or it has any kind of, relativity to now. I'm sure it's on there, but like, I'll go look for like a Native American book, like written by,
Right.
or something like that, but yeah, they have most of the stuff on there.
Nice. Well, all right, man. Seems like we're gonna be doing some reading, and I hope everyone enjoyed the show. I really hope that you guys got as much of a kick out of it as we did. We'll be back next week with another episode. So, like we said, check out Mr. Bolelli's works, check out his books, check out his podcast. Just enjoy what he has to offer. Maybe you'll learn something. I sure as hell did.
Yeah, go to DanieleBolelli.com.
Yeah.
And I think if you just begin trying to spell his name, it should pop up. 'Cause
Yeah.
I don't know if I think it's pretty straightforward, but I think it's just Daniele
Yeah.
is Daniele.
And it'll be in our episode title. It's like the most Italian name you could ever imagine. So, yeah. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Read a book, learn some history, and I don't know, get drunk this weekend. Have a good time, whatever. Have a good one, you guys. Stay safe out there in the cosmos.